Rink-wide Vancouver. It's the show that always scores. Wadden and JPat here with you. Rink-wide is presented by Bodog. Sports odds, poker tips, free casino games. Make a play today at Bodog. And yeah, I got to put a distinction on this show right now, JPat. Rink-wide Vancouver. Big news coming tomorrow. Stay tuned for that as we record this here on September 20th, September 21st. Big news in the rink-wide camp.
You got my interest now. I thought you were talking about, because I was in Penticton for the last, I thought you were trying to distinguish the fact that I'm home. I'm back in Vancouver. Let me just say this. I drove home after Young Stars on Monday night. Left Penticton around 6:30, was making great time, ran into this massive paving project, 176th in Surrey, and they basically 3 lanes of the highway shut down or clogged down to 1. So, that threw me off a little bit. But I have to say this part. Have you driven the Coquihalla since the flooding and the...
Yes.
Yeah, we did the golf on a road trip.
Yep.
Well, we drove that in daylight then. The Coke at night, there are some asshats that drive that highway that, I guess maybe they've got a better feel for it and they know where they're going, but just with the number of construction zones and pylons that taper it down to 1 lane, and there's still some tight turns and guys that are just 160 and 170 just ripping past me. I thought I was going fast enough. Apparently not. And in fact, there was one point when we got down down the hill into close to Hope, and it was a massive construction zone. And for a split second, I thought I had crossed over into the wrong lane of traffic. for a split second, I had this vision of a semi coming right just bearing down on me. Anyways, I stayed in my lane. I made it home, and happy to be home for a couple of days and do some laundry and off to Whistler here.
Yeah, so, off to Whistler for both of us. Really, I'll be joining you up in there in Whistler as well. But let's put a recap on Young Stars, though, from what you saw for the Canucks. I mean, they ended up going 2-1 while they were there. They lose their last game to the Edmonton Oilers, who had a bunch of real young stars there, first-round picks, including Dylan Holloway, who had a nice goal in that game. But, just sort of put a bow on everything that you saw there in Penticton and, give us some standout performances. I know in the last pod you were praising a few names there. Were any other names that stood out over the tourney?
Yeah, Linus Karlsson was the guy. He scored both of their goals on Monday, a 5-2 loss to the Oilers. It was 2-0 Edmonton early, and then Karlsson scored twice, made it a 2-2 tie, and thought, all right, this thing's setting up for a good finish to the game into the tournament, and then the Oilers kind of took over from there. Jeremy Colleton, after the game, had talked about the fact that, it was the second game of the day, midday, in Penticton, and he thought the ice was a little bit choppy, but it's choppy for both teams. The other thing, though, he had said that the Canucks had played Sunday against Winnipeg and then played Monday. The Oilers hadn't played since Saturday against Calgary. Now, it's early season. You wouldn't think fatigue is a huge factor, but he kind of thought back-to-back maybe that his team was dragging a little bit at the end. But he also mentioned that the Oilers' best players kind of showed up, and Holloway did score a very nice shorthanded goal. There were a couple of defensive breakdowns on Monday that we hadn't seen earlier in the tournament from the Canucks. Artur Silovs wasn't quite as sharp, I didn't think, on Monday as he was in the shutout game against Calgary to start things. But really, it was the same cast of characters. Linus Karlsson was the best player Monday. He was their best player over the course of the weekend. He had 3 goals and 2 assists. I think Tristan Nielsen maybe made the biggest strides to turn some heads, a guy that's on an AHL contract. But it won't shock me down the road. And I think I've said this before. If he gets a sniff, the guy just plays man, does he play hard. He competes, but he is also able to create offense and had a couple of goals and a really nice goal in the opener on Friday night. So just file that one away. Tristan Nielsen, I would assume he's getting the invite to main camp. And, he talked about how just skating out at 8 rinks the last bunch of days prior to Young Stars, getting that confidence boost of being on the ice with Bo Horvat and JT Miller and those types of guys. He's not there yet, but just keep that in mind. If he is able to continue to sort of be that dog in a bone kind of player at the American Hockey League level. Steve Baines was one of the stories going into the weekend and then opened the scoring on Friday and had the family, his parents were in attendance. It was a great story. And he had a really nice night on Friday. I didn't think his play stayed at that level, and that's not much of a knock on him. He just had a really good... He wasn't poor the rest of the way. He just wasn't as prominent as he was in that first game. But he remains a legit prospect and certainly didn't look out of place. And I thought, you could see why the Canucks were excited to get him. You could see some of the skills that made him a standout in the scoring champ in the Western Hockey League. Other than that, I asked Jeremy Colleton after the game, we had spent so much of the weekend focusing on forwards. Was there anybody on defense? Gave Jet Wu some praise. And of course, there's been a lot of noise around Jet Wu. The very fact that at 22, he was one of the guys that was told to go and play in Young Stars. And he was all right. I thought Alex Canuck-Leipert, the former Vancouver Giant who played in Abbotsford last year, he's not the biggest guy. He had 2 fights over the weekend. And it's not about dropping the gloves necessarily. Like, this isn't, Young Stars certainly didn't get out of hand. There wasn't a lot of fighting, but hey, when the bell rang, he was there sticking up for teammates and absolutely devastated the guy that he fought on Monday afternoon. So, I noticed that there was that element of toughness that he brought to a tournament like that one. But I wasn't sure we would see any fights over the course of the weekend. 10 years ago, I think you would have seen a bunch, but the game obviously has changed. So overall, though, it was just so good to be back. Penticton in September, the sun was shining. It was a glorious day on Monday. We had 2 games. Calgary and Winnipeg played early, and then Edmonton and Vancouver finished things up. So, yeah, Edmonton goes 3-0. They win the title, the Silver Peach, or whatever we were going to to give them the trophy. And I think the Canucks, there was enough out of the weekend with some of those players that I mentioned, getting ready for main camp. That's really what it's all about. 3 games in 4 days. And, there was enough there. Just, I think the organization got what it wanted out of Young Stars, and that is, it's a great way to assess what you've got up against players that are in that same boat on those other teams. And after a 3-year hiatus, it was good to be back. And I know that Seattle wants in. Ronnie Francis was up there over the weekend as well. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if this thing grows in the years ahead. There was a little bit of talk that 5 teams makes it awkward, that maybe if Seattle's going to come in, that they'll look to bring in another team and make it a 6-team tournament. So, I don't know how much you want to expand it. Like, to me, 3 games in 4 nights ahead of main camp feels about right. Because if you're going to play 4 games, you're probably going to want to bring in a few extra players. And all of a sudden, do you want to expand the rosters? I think they had 26 up there as it was. And that was like filling it out with free agents and walk-ons and all. I'm not sure that you want to round out your roster a whole lot more. And I also don't know that you want guys playing 4 games in 5 nights ahead of going to a main camp. But, if there's some growth there, it's a phenomenal facility. We've touched on that. Great main bowl, but they've got the practice sheet as well. It can handle an event like this one. And I was just happy to see it back. And so looking forward to, we got to find a way to get you up there next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe Winnipeg bows out and Seattle comes in. Maybe Winnipeg goes a little bit closer east,
Yeah, they may have some options. You're right, in the sort of geographically a little more favorable to them. But I think, like everybody, they love Penticton when the sun is shining, and in September, the way it was this past weekend. So thanks to everybody. Penticton was a great host site. Saw lots of familiar faces from years gone by. And it's just so good to get back in that hockey environment, see some competitive games played, but bring on training camp, ready to get this thing going now.
Before we pivot to training camp, a couple of big names stuck around while a lot of the brass left town to do the Jake Milford golf tournament. I saw you tweeting about the Sedins and how they stuck around with the young guys.
Yeah, I was a little surprised. Jake Milford, that's a long-standing event that sort of kicks off the season for the veteran players, but it's big for the organization. It's not cheap to get into that thing. So they get some high rollers that pay for the right to play a round of golf with, not just players, but management. And you would think that the Sedins would be a part of that as well. If this organization is sort of putting its, heritage on display in one room, there certainly would be room for Daniel and Henrik, but hey, credit to them. You're right. They, a lot of the management crew rolled out, most of the staff was there over the weekend, but on Monday, the Canucks management suite was noticeably emptier than it had been through the weekend. But there were Daniel and Henrik and Chris Higgins and Mike Komisarek was working on the bench and Michael Samuelson. So the player development guys, they were there to see it through, and that's their job. And so, hey, if it means foregoing the corporate golf tournament for a year, so be it. But all those guys who are there to evaluate what they saw on the ice, and it'd be fascinating to know, who stood out to them, because we can see some things, but obviously as former players, they're looking at things a little bit differently. But they were there doing the evaluation from start to finish.
Speaking of the Jake Milford tournament, I was out there at Northview and got to hear from Curtis Lazar, Jack Rathbone, and Bruce Boudreau. We'll hear from them in just a moment, though. But just going around before they teed off and just sort of looking around, guys around the putting green, all the Russians were together, Mikheyev, Kuzmenko, and Podkolzin. Pod's putting stroke needs a little bit of work. Needs a little bit of work.
Yeah.
A little suspect. You can check it out.
So does mine.
Yeah. Well,
I'm in no position. Well. Yeah.
Check it out at Rinkwide Podcast on our Instagram. I believe we have a video up there. But I did find out that the consensus is that JT Miller is the man when it comes to being the best golfer on the Canucks, and that it's either Podkolzin or Nils Höglander that would be the worst. That is at least according to the Canucks Twitter account, which they had a video out explaining all of that. One thing I found interesting.
They were dragging Höglander. I couldn't believe. I watched
big time. Big time. Yeah, big time.
Single guy just dumping on poor old Hoagie.
Pods wasn't getting a whole lot of love either, though. And I'm wondering if Pods has actually even swung a golf club before. That said, though, I found it interesting because I saw that our buddies out at Northlands there in North Vancouver, they were hosting a few of the Canucks over the last few weeks. And Thatcher Demko was there twice. And every time they took the photo post round, it looked like Thatcher Demko was wearing his flip-flops. And I'm like, well, maybe he gets out of his shoes really quickly. So I hit up our buddy Curtis over at Northlands and I said, please tell me he plays in those flip-flops. He said barefoot. Now, on the Canucks Twitter, they had a photo of Demko in the bunker barefoot. Do you think he actually plays barefoot? Think there's an advantage to that at all? I don't know.
He's a San Diego guy. This sort of laid-back mentality. I don't know. Maybe he can't afford golf shoes. Should we take up collection for him? Is that?
I think he could afford
he's all right.
a pair or two. It's maybe a pair or two. All right.
I hear he knocks it around pretty well. Miller, I think, is the consensus, but my understanding is that Demko, he can move it around the golf course pretty well as well.
Höglander was saying Elias Pettersson in terms of the best player, but I think
Höglander doesn't know anything about golf.
Exactly.
I'm not taking his word for anything.
Pointed to the closest guy that was next to him. Yeah, him. He's better. I don't know. All right. Bruce Boudreau, though, did speak to the media, and he was asked about the Quinn Hughes, whether or not they'll put him on the right side, whether they'll try it. Here is the head coach on whether they'll experiment with Hughes on the right side.
Well, I mean, what we were thinking is, like, OEL has always been an offensive left defenseman, and he may have not had the opportunities to be that as much last year because Quinn was, an offensive left defenseman. But Quinn came up to me in the summer and said, listen, I'm going to try I wouldn't mind trying the right side if you don't have a problem with it. So I said, no, I think that would be great for you to be able to do that. So he's been practicing all summer on the right side. And I think if you get an offensive D on the left side and the right side, you're balancing things out a bit. And I think it would work well. We're going to experiment with it. We don't know if it'll stay, but we'll experiment with it during training camp.
Does that balance things out, though? An offensive defenseman with an offensive defenseman? Do you think that maybe you'd want to have more of a stay-at-home guy with Quinn Hughes roving around?
Well, I just think you want Quinn Hughes to play with a better player, whoever. And when you look at what the right side options present, with all due respect to Luke Schenn, and I'm not sitting here saying that Luke Schenn can't play in the NHL, and we know how popular he is in the room. We know how popular he is with the fan base. I mean, there's sort of a cult of Luke Schenn in this market now. But, is he the optimal partner for Quinn Hughes? And I don't think many people would say, yeah, he is. I know Quinn talked him up, and Quinn has a ton of respect for what Luke Schenn has done for him. But you look at Devon Toews and Cale Makar, and that was Colorado going out and finding, a way better partner for Makar, who's an incredible player, probably the best defenseman in the National Hockey League. He's got the Norris to show that he certainly was last year. That's what you would love. You'd love to take your best player and turbocharge him with a really good player, and the Canucks just don't have that. And so they're sort of moving things around here. I think Quinn Hughes is a smart enough player that he could adapt to the right side. But there are nuances. There's, going back and retrieving pucks. Now, all of a sudden, you're doing things on your backhand. And, I know the way he breaks pucks out most of the time is skating them out of traffic. Well, you could do that from the right or the left. But I just think he's probably a better player on his natural side. But if you're looking at the options the Canucks have, is Quinn Hughes on the right side better than any of the natural right-handers? Yeah, probably. So time for the experiment. And where I really think could work is if the Canucks are down a goal in the third period, they need some offense. Yeah. Slide them over and play them with OEL and just play them a lot. Like we've seen Quinn Hughes play 10, 11, 12 minutes of a third period. Play them with OEL. I do think that you're putting your team in, a better situation to generate some offense from the back end and to try to get the tying goal, maybe a go-ahead goal, all that kind of stuff. So I think situationally it can work, but, I'm not expecting that Quinn Hughes is making that, a permanent transition to the right side. And I've said it before, if it happens, man, it opens the door for a guy like Jack Rathbone. on the left side, but Rathbone's played 11 NHL games. And I know he was really good in the AHL. That's the AHL. Like, he still has to prove a fair bit at the National Hockey League level. So it would open a door for him. But if we're assessing the Canucks defense, like all of a sudden you're moving Quinn Hughes to the right side, now Jack Rathbone has to be able to play. He's got to be able to hold up his end of the bargain. It'd be an opportunity for Travis Dermott probably to slide up. Is Travis Dermott a second pair guy? We've had this discussion before. Yeah. Let's see what happens. But by moving Hughes to the right, you are really just shifting your issues around on that defense core. And the bottom line is, and we've said it all summer, and they really haven't done anything, the defense core 1 through 6. And then even beyond that, it's when injuries hit. Now you're talking about some depth guys. Like, I like Kyle Burroughs and what he brought to the mix last year, but Kyle Burroughs is a depth defenseman. And, if there's an injury to a guy like Tyler Myers, is Kyle Burroughs able to step up and step in and give you the kind of minutes, or, Tucker Poolman, we still aren't certain about, is he 100% ready to go green light when training camp? Will get the answer here, I guess, later in the week up in Whistler. But I still think there are questions. Injuries are a fact of life. They always seem to happen to Canuck defenders. And I'm not sold on what they've got beyond their top 6. I'm not sold necessarily on their top 6. And then I still have some real questions about the depth beyond that. So I'm willing to give Quinn Hughes on the right side a shot. But, long term, the answer is to find him a better partner on the right side that allow him to go back to the left and do his thing, but just do it better.
Maybe just to have it in your back pocket, though, right?
Yeah, again, situationally, no issues with it. And I think Quinn Hughes is so smart and adaptable that I don't think he'd have any problem playing the right side and playing it fairly effectively.
Yeah. Well, Bruce was asked about how he'll deploy the defenseman now. And of course, with the suggestion that Hughes could be on the right side, but he brings up a familiar name on the right side that, might be able to return.
It's an I don't know thing. It's a let's see how it works thing. I mean, if it doesn't work out and he's not comfortable and he's not as effective on the right side as he would be on the left side, we'll move him right back. I mean, a lot was happening too, as we didn't know the health of Poolman. And, if he's healthy, that adds it. Now all of a sudden you got Myers, Shen, Poolman on the right side, and then you might not need Quinn on the left side as much, or on the right side as much. So, I mean, how in hockey, injuries make you do a lot of things that you might not be ready to do. But we thought, let's at least experiment. And if it does work, then we know we could always come back to that.
Exactly. Right there. It is right there, right? Having it in your back pocket. And they might as well experiment with it through training camp, through these exhibition games while they have the opportunity to do so. But I mean, you listen to the head coach talk right there. Like, Poolman could be a big factor for them this year. I know we've talked about this already on a past podcast, but just, slotting in Shen there as well, right? Like, that's the faith that they still have in Luke Shen.
Yeah, but I think it was interesting to hear Bruce a week of training camp saying if Poolman's healthy. I still don't know that anybody in the organization truly knows. He's going to have to go through a physical, and they know his history. Even though there have been changes to the medical staff, like, his history is well documented. He has to pass this physical. And we've seen elsewhere that Toronto announced a couple of guys aren't going to be ready, and Sean Couturier in Philadelphia. And we've seen this. It was this week last year that the Canucks promised Travis Hamonic, he'll be out in Abbotsford. Not so much. And a couple of years ago, we showed up and Antoine Roussel wasn't available on the first day of training camp, found out that he had suffered a concussion in, informal skates. Like, these things happen. So it is always one of the questions that I put to the general manager. I'll put it to Patrick Calvin whenever he's available here this week. Is everybody that's supposed to be available to the Vancouver Canucks ready for the start of training camp? And we'll find out. But I still think that there are some cautionary notes around a guy like Tucker Poolman. And really until he starts playing game action, like, he can look good out of Burnaby skating at 8 rinks with his, teammates and all those types of things. But once they drop the puck in preseason and guys are coming and trying to finish checks and all, game speed, those are things that he has to answer. And really the only way to do it is to suit up and play.
So if Poolman isn't ready, is the best deployment to have perhaps Hughes be on that right side with OEL?
Well, in the preseason, you're not likely to dress your top 6 in any game, right? Like, there's preseason is for giving guys opportunities and some of the depth guys. And, we talk about depth and Kyle Burroughs. Like, I imagine that a guy like Brady Keeper is going to come to training camp this year and say, like, hey, don't forget about me. Sure. But he also was out of hockey for a year with that gruesome broken leg that was suffered last year on the final day of training camp. So he needs game reps. I'm not thinking that Brady Keeper is going to make the team out of training camp. maybe he does enough to earn an opportunity, but he's healthy this time around and he's on a one-way contract, and sure he wants to put his best foot forward and believes that there might be an opportunity for him. So, that's what training camp is for, and preseason is to give Jack Rathbone some reps. And Rathbone played every preseason game last year. I don't anticipate that'll happen this time around, but Brady Keeper may get, a bunch of looks on the right side just so that they have a sense of, what they've got and where his game is after a year off. And then you've got other guys that Jet Wu, I would imagine, will get moved on to main camp. I would think if Jet Wu does enough, maybe he gets into a preseason game or two as well. So, I think you go through preseason, you're trying to assess and evaluate God. I would imagine that Quinn Hughes will play some right side in the preseason as well, but they don't ultimately have to make that decision until, a day or two before that season opener on October the 12th in Edmonton.
So Jack Rathbone, of course, wants to stick with the big club this year. He's, getting paid on a one-way deal, so he wants to keep himself up there, but he got 40 points in 39 games in the AHL last year. So we know about the offensive game with Jack Rathbone, but can the defensive game hold up in the NHL? Here's what Rathbone had to say about how his offseason has gone and, whether he's improved on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think a lot of work done in season last year, and then just going into the offseason, I think there's not a whole lot of opportunity to work on your defensive game, but, a lot of video work, talking with guys, just that we've got a lot of guys that played in the league for a long time in that Boston area. A lot of defensemen that I work with there that kind of picked their brain over the course of the offseason on what it takes, and I think I'm ready to take that step.
And he's going to have to take that step defensively if he's going to want to stick in the NHL. He's not really going to get the opportunities, it looks like, to sort of chip in offensively, especially on the power play, because you're going to have Quinn Hughes and likely OEL on the second unit.
I love that answer, though. And look, he's a Harvard guy. Like, he's smart. And every time he opens his mouth and conducts these interviews, I find it fascinating. And I love to hear that. He knows that the offensive game is there. He was really good at the American Hockey League level. He knows that from the top down, though, in the organization, they're all watching him defensively. So he's watching video from last year. He's picking the brains of guys that play the position. He's putting in the work. And I'm really excited to see what the payoff is here. And we'll start to get some answers about that training camp and then into the preseason. They are supposed to scrimmage on Saturday up in Whistler if people are making plans to head up for any part of training camp Thursday and Friday on the ice and, working on drills. But apparently training camp will break with a scrimmage on Saturday. And so, I just want to see Rathbone matching up against National Hockey League guys and see what he looks like defensively.
A newcomer, Curtis Lazar, has joined the Canucks this year. Of course, a local product, raved about the fact that he grew up as a Canucks fan. It's a dream of his to play for the Canucks, but he brings something to the Canucks that they need in terms of a little bit of grit, some penalty killing, and solid fourth line center. And he was asked about his identity yesterday at the Jake Milford golf tournament. Here's what the local product had to say that he's going to bring to the Canucks this year.
And I think a lot of players, they do a lot better once they understand their role, what's expected of them, and there's no gray areas. When I hop on the ice, I feel like that's the reason why I brought in, kill penalties, keep the puck in your net, be hard, strong on pucks, and kind of be the momentum changer. So I kind of know what's brought me my identity, what made the Canucks target me and ultimately sign me. And again, just be the best version of myself because I'm going to contribute in that way. And
it's kind of funny in the NHL nowadays, you have to have the stars, obviously, but those bottom six guys are just so key, and how well you spend your money really could be the difference for a lot of teams in the NHL. And bringing in a guy like Lazar, who knows his identity, knows exactly what he's going to bring to the Canucks, and really is, doesn't have to give you any much more than what he is.
And, I talked about it the day that he signed, how excited he was, salmon arm guy. So BC boys, watched the Canucks, followed them, had jerseys growing up and all that kind of stuff. And that's great, but it's ultimately, what have you done for me lately? You're getting paid. Do the things that he said there. Kill penalties, keep the puck out of the net, try to protect leads late. And the one thing that we have gleaned about Curtis Lazar over the years is just how low maintenance he is. And I think coaches really appreciate that. I remember talking to Ray Ferraro in the summer, and Ferraro was like, Bruce will talk to Lazar at the start of the season. He probably doesn't have to talk to him the rest of the way, although the two of those guys both love talking. So I'm sure that they will have some conversations. But just in terms of coachability, I think Lazar gets it. And he said as much. It's taken him a while to understand what he is to stay in the National Hockey League. But this guy gets it. He understands his role. He'll play it to a T. And, to get him at the price point they did for 3 years, I think there's probably some value in that contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did go on to say that, again, it's been a dream of his to play for the Canucks. So you got to like that in terms of the passion that he's going to bring to the team as well. And a lot of people like to suggest, oh yeah, guy coming home, BC product wants to play for this team. Not always the case. Definitely the case here for Curtis Lazar, though. All right, Bruce Boudreau was asked about his training camp, and we used to know with Travis Green, he'd have the bag skate. I always wondered why coaches would do this, especially at this level. I always wondered if the players, NHL players sort of rolled their eyes like, really? We're doing this again? Like, you don't think we're in shape? And Bruce Boudreau sort of talked about he doesn't really know exactly what his training camp is going to look like, but we know that he's not going to have the bag skate.
It's a tough question because I don't know what to say. I mean, we're going to work hard. In the past, I never scrimmaged. And the first 3 days we'll be scrimmaging, doing a lot of scrimmaging up in Whistler. But I mean, for the most part, it's system work, practice work, conditioning work. And that's it. And getting them in the mode that we want to win every time we put the skates on.
What do you think, though? Like when you hear that bag skate, oh, it's coming up, everyone's going to have to do it. Do you think the guys sort of went like, come on, man, this isn't Pee Wee hockey anymore. It's the NHL.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I think it separates the guys that put in the work in the preseason. I remember Tim Schaller a couple of years ago absolutely struggling at his first Canuck training camp. And he was like, I had heard how hard it was, and I thought I had trained, but, it caught me off guard. And obviously we know that Olli Juolevi was left in the dust last year, and it does. It separates the guys that have put in the work, the preparation, and you can't fake it at this level. So, yeah, I mean, some of the guys may roll their eyes, but hey, Travis Green was the coach then. That was the way he wanted to conduct business. Bruce is going to do it his way. I'm always down for a little bit of scrimmage. I think what they'll do is, 2 NHL groups, and then maybe some of the fringe AHL guys will skate in a group of their own. And I would imagine that when they overlap, maybe they have a quick scrimmage on Thursday and Friday, and then I think Saturday will be more of a game situation, maybe a couple of periods, bring out the referees and those types of things. But, the one thing I heard from Bruce yesterday was no experimentation. Like, he wants to hit the ground running. He recognizes, I think they all do, the importance of game 1, game 10, game 20, through those first 25. I mean, that flushed their season last year, and those games mean as much as the final 57. And so, I'm really interested. Like, here we sit a couple of days away from training camp. We still don't know line combinations and those types of things, but I think that's going to be fascinating to get a sense of the way Bruce is going to roll it out. And it doesn't sound like he's messing around. Now, is he going to be beholden to that, the way they skate on day 1 of training camp, through the preseason? Because I do think preseason at times one of guys in slightly different roles, and maybe you want Mikheyev up, in a top 6, maybe you want to see him in a checking role one night, so I think there has to be a little bit of flexibility to your lineup. But again, I just, first day of training camp, it's going to be like Christmas morning for a lot of Canuck fans because Bruce has all these options on his forward lines and the combinations. We're about to get a better sense of what he's thinking, who he thinks is going to play with whom, and who can complement whom. So all that kind of stuff. Days out from training camp, and we still don't know yet, but we're going to get some answers soon.
Well, here is the head coach on whether he will experiment with his lines.
There's not going to be a lot of experimenting, believe me. I mean, you'll be able to pretty well tell the way I'm feeling in the first day of camp as far as lines and situations. But everybody knows the importance. I mean, I think when I've talked to the players all summer long, that the importance of the good start, they know what happened last year. They know what they could become in the second half. But it's like they wish they had more time in the second half when I was there. But so they know the importance of getting off to a good start. And I mean, it's not easy in the first 5 are on the road, but I think they're up for the challenge. Everybody's saying the right things anyway right now.
Now, when he was asked about Quinn Hughes playing the right side of defense, Patrick Johnson, our buddy from the province there, sort of joked with Bruce and said, if Quinn wanted to play center, would you let him play center? And Bruce really quickly back said, not on this team, he wouldn't be able to. So I think that sort of gives it away a little bit on what he's thinking about down the middle. And honestly, I'm excited for it. I want to see the Miller, Pettersson, Horvat 1, 2, 3, because boy, there's very few teams that could rival that much depth down the middle.
Yeah, and we've known for a while now that that's kind of the way he's been leaning, and that certainly is a strength of the Vancouver Canucks. So now it's just a question of who gets to play with whom, and we'll find out what Bruce is thinking here. But yeah, that's an area. It's going to give Bruce some flexibility, I think. It will give him options, but it'll also give other teams something to think about. Because you're right. Like, there are a lot of teams that have 2 centers that they like, but in the flat cap world, like, every team's got warts, and for a lot of teams, it's finding that depth down the middle. The Canucks think that going 3 deep is going to give them a leg up. And I guess we won't have to wait too much longer to find out if that is in fact the case.
Rink-wide Vancouver is a presentation of Bodog. Make a play at Canada's choice for free casino games, sports odds, and poker strategies. I want to get into some NHL news because there's a few things that are Canucks relatable here that have happened today as we record this on September 20th. But let's give you a couple of Bodog, some future lines here. See maybe where you might lay your money, JPat. We've got futures for NHL Awards, and 3 Canucks are involved. Really interesting. They don't have futures for the Norris Trophy just yet, which, of course, I think you'd want to lay your money perhaps on Quinn Hughes. But they do have for the Vezina, Thatcher Demko to win it at plus 1,800. Or for the Hart, you've got your choice between Elias Pettersson at plus 5,000 or JT Miller at plus 10,000. If you had to put your money on one player, one bet, where would you put it?
Oh, of those 3, let's go with Thatcher Demko just going lights out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think Pettersson and Miller could both have incredible seasons, but there's just so many good forwards out there, and that's a tough nut to crack. Thatcher Demko got himself a Vezina vote late last year, so I think he kind of announced that he's on the radar around the National Hockey League. We spent a fair bit of the season talking about would he or wouldn't he. In the end, he did get a Vezina vote. You're living in a world with Igor Shesterkin. That's going to be difficult competition. And obviously there are other really good goaltenders out there, but I just think we've seen the kind of goaltending that Demko can deliver for the Vancouver Canucks if he is able to, first of all, stay healthy, which he did up until the end last year. His workload is going to be a fascinating story to monitor as the season goes along. The Spencer Martin factor, how much do they trust Martin? How much are they willing to go away from Demko? As the stakes get higher, if they stay in the playoff mix, it's easy to say, hey, we got to get Demko rest. But we saw last year, they just couldn't go away from him. And in the end, they wore him down, basically turned him into dust. So they have to be careful about that. But I think there's room for him to grow, working with Ian Clark on a daily basis and knowing now what it takes to be a true number one with travel and everything else as we get back into sort of normal hockey seasons. Yeah, I think of those 3, Thatcher Demko would be my guy.
Yeah, I think plus 1,800. There's some good value there, and you have a very good chance being able to win it with Demko. I think you're right with Pettersson and Miller. They could have 100-point seasons, and they'd still not even be in, perhaps even in the top 10 voting for the Hart. So many good forwards out there. But yeah, head over to Bodog and place your bet. Of course, Bodog is your source for free casino games and the latest sports odds. Okay, NHL news, and of course, we always like to relate things to the Canucks here. A former Canuck in Jake Virtanen getting a PTO with the Edmonton Oilers. And we saw this coming, and we saw a lot of people online perhaps upset about it. But at the end of the day, Jake Virtanen was found not guilty and has been given another shot by the Edmonton Oilers, whether their fan base likes it or not.
Yeah. For me, this is way more a story about the Edmonton Oilers now than it is about Jake Virtanen. I think everybody knows what Jake Virtanen is, a couple of years removed from any sort of impact at the National Hockey League level, barely left a dent on the KHL. I mean, he was a guy that had some fitness issues. I remember training camp in Victoria where they sent him into the AHL group to start on the first day because he arrived and fitness wasn't where it was supposed to be. Certainly didn't look like he was in playing shape. The shots that I saw him walking in and out of court over the summer, he looks like he's leaned down when I saw him do his media in Edmonton. So maybe he's put in some work here in the last couple of weeks, whatever. I still think fitness is going to be an issue. But for me, this is way more about the Oilers and what they value and why they think this is worth the gamble and, how do you sell it to your fan base? So say what you will about Jake Virtanen. Everybody's going to see him a little bit differently, I suppose. If he wants to resume his NHL career, he needs a place to play, and he needs a team that's willing to give him that opportunity. It's a PTO. That's all it is. There's no promises being made here, but I just think I want to hear from Ken Holland on why. Why? I know they've taken chances on other guys, but say what you will about Evander Kane. Nobody ever questioned his hockey ability and what he could do for a team to help a team. I don't know how Jake Virtanen makes your team any better at this stage of his career. So for me, it's more about the Oilers and the why. And I'd like to hear from Kenny Holland on that one.
Yeah, and I'm just sort of looking at their depth chart and just wondering really where he fits in here. with this Oilers team that is. And, it depends on where they sort of find a young rookie like Dylan Holloway, whether he's ready to make the step into the NHL this year. But yeah, I think it's a head scratcher myself. And honestly, yeah, you're right. Is the playing ability even there anymore for Jake Virtanen in terms of being able to play at an NHL level? Very underwhelming numbers in the KHL last year. And then, as you pointed out as well, he's had fitness issues in the past. So be interesting to see what happens with Jake Virtanen.
I laugh. And again, I know this isn't a humorous situation, but I just laughed at this angle. The number of things that I read, though, on Monday out of Edmonton, pumping him up as this power forward. And it's like, has nobody paid any attention? Yes, he's big. I mean, his best asset was his speed. I don't know that he still possesses that speed, but this idea that he's a power forward, like, shied away from physical contact. He wasn't much of an initiator here. Certainly, to me, big part of being a power forward, it's the power part. And that's just not the game that he plays. He wanted to be a skill guy. So I don't know. I just in the same division, and yet like multiple things that I read yesterday, and they all just call him power forward. And I know Jim Benning used to do it as well. And it's because, he's over 6 feet tall and somehow that makes him a power forward. No, sorry, not in my mind. Like, he wasn't a guy that played that style of game. Like, when I think of power forwards, Todd Bertuzzi and, Keith Tkachuk and Billy Guerin and those types of guys that had an element, like, you knew when they were on the ice and your head was on a swivel because they were going to run you through the boards. Like, that's just not who this guy was. And I have no idea if that's who he is or could be if he gets, and again, it's a PTO. He's got to go and prove himself and earn a contract. Like, this is just a baby step, I suppose. Like, it doesn't mean he's going to be an Edmonton Oiler. He's just showing up for their training camp, and we'll see where it goes from there.
There's an argument that Zach McEwen was a better power forward in his time with the Canucks than Jake Virtanen was. We used to scream for Virtanen to go to the net. Didn't do it very often. All right. Some retiring today of some big players. PK Subban, Zdeno Chara, Keith Yandel, all announcing that they're retiring from the game. And when I think of, obviously when you think of Chara, you know what we think of. And I don't know if we want to go back down that road. But with PK Subban, I think back to 2016 when Jim Benning was fined $50,000 for his comments on TSN 1040 about the Canucks and the pursuit of perhaps PK Subban. And it's funny because I went back and looked at some old articles on that, and our buddy Thomas Drance, who was writing for Canucks Army at the time, just suggested that, even if the Canucks were to perhaps try to go down that road with PK Subban, that, it would be costly. And he suggested that, maybe the 5th overall pick would have had to be in play then. And, Bo Horvat, a younger Bo Horvat, and perhaps even Chris Tanev there for Subban. When you think back on that, though, I mean, that was Olli Juolevi that they took 5th overall. Now, whether the Montreal Canadiens would have taken Olli Juolevi 5th overall is questionable. But, if you looked at that trade as a whole, Juolevi, Horvat, Tanev for Subban back then, like, would you have done it, JPat?
Back then,
he was still a very good defenseman. Still, like, what? I think 3 years off of Norris.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe you give it some consideration. It's hard to do that math all these years later. I will say, though, like, I'm surprised he's 33. Like, I'm surprised that this is the end for him. And I know that he's got business interests and he'll be just fine. But I thought there would be one more act. And I do wonder, were there no offers? Was it PTOs and he wasn't interested in going that route? Was it, the teams that were interested were in locations that maybe he didn't want? I don't know.
He's a victim of the flat cap. He's 100%. His career has been shortened because of this flat cap.
And he's made enough dough that we don't have to worry about him. But he was all about staying in the NHL. I'm surprised. He's not 36 or 38. He's 33. I know that there was talk about, should the Canucks take a stab at PK in the summer here, and they never really were linked to. I know Jim Rutherford sort of denied it at every turn when he was asked. And like Zdeno Chara, I get. Guy's played 1,800 games and 200 more in the playoffs and Stanley Cup, but he's 45. He had his retirement, and Yandel was getting the healthy scratch treatment and the Iron Man streak and all that kind of stuff. Like, maybe the writing wasn't on the wall there. I just thought a player of PK's profile with his charisma, I'm surprised that there isn't a market for even one more season for PK Subban. I will say this about Zdeno Chara, and I know where you were going with the memories of him.
Yeah.
I think back to my days calling games in the Western Hockey League when he showed up in Prince George, and it was just, unlike anything anybody had ever seen at that time. 6'9" on 6'11" on skates, playing junior hockey. for the Prince George Cougars, and it was a great rivalry with Kamloops, so I saw him a lot. And, the thing was, he could move. He could move then. He moved throughout his career. Just a fascinating player at that size. And I know in our last podcast, we talked about the Calgary Flames guy that, the forward that's 6'8". Obviously, Tyler Myers right now gets the crown, if anybody can reach that high to put it on his head. But with Chara stepping away, Tyler Myers is officially, according to NHL.com, the tallest player in the National Hockey League right now. So there are some guys that are an inch shorter than him, but Tyler Myers now, with Chara out of the way, Tyler Myers, tallest guy in the NHL.
There you go. Well, Tyler Myers can brag about that in every city he goes to. I'm the tallest, right? $80.375 million over 3 contracts for PK Subban. Is his second act as lucrative as his first act? And you know where I'm going, because there's going to be a bidding war between ESPN and TNT for his services.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hockey Night in Canada was in there. I don't know if they can pay him at that same thing, but
not a chance.
No,
not a chance. No, there's no way they're putting the money up. It's going to be between the big guys down south.
Yeah, and that's where I said, he's got business interests and off-ice interests that, I'm not surprised that part of it, that maybe his interest in the game had waned a little bit as well. And maybe that led to the realization that it was time for this next chapter. But you're right. If that's what he wants to do and that's what he wants to pursue, there'd be a bidding war there, and he'd be great. I mean, he never met a microphone that he doesn't like. And he's got the personality that pops. And so it'd be good for the game. And why not? It only makes sense that the networks would want him to be a part of, what they're trying to put together.
All right, we talked about this on the last pod, but Nate McKinnon has signed that deal, and yes, he is. He's a very rich man, the highest paid player in the league. I think there's technically, I don't put it this way, he makes $12.6 million.
Well, it doesn't kick in, right? But it doesn't. It's like JT Miller, right? It doesn't kick in until next year. So poor old Nate's going to have to get by on 6'3" this year, and then doubles his salary. And the way it's structured with the crazy signing bonuses in the first, almost half of it, almost $50 million of the $100 million is paid in the first 3 years. So he's got his cup, and now he's got his bag, and it is full of dough. But again, he deserves. Although somebody pointed out, he's never had a 99-point season like JT Miller, but he has been ridiculously consistent. I think he's got three seasons in the 90s, and has the cup now to show for it as well.
Survey 100 people on whether they would want Nate McKinnon or JT Miller.
No. It was just the point was made that
JT Miller.
Funny though, I hadn't really thought of it in the terms he's done a lot in the game and is one of the game's best players, hands down, and certainly one of my favorites to watch.
Yes,
I've said this repeatedly. I just love the way that he sort of hunts the other team's net and he gets in that crouch with the puck, and he's just incredible in the speed when on the power play when they drop it to him, and he, the zone entry just wheels up the middle of the ice. Dude is dangerous, and Denver's a great place, and obviously they've put something special together there. So I'm not surprised that they were able to get the deal done, and we'll see if they can keep the band together. But as somebody pointed out as well, is he at Connor McDavid's level on an individual basis? I think they're in the same conversation. I think most people would say that McDavid is the better player, but perhaps some of this was a recognition of, team-friendly deal that Colorado got with that last contract. Maybe this is them sliding Nate just a little on the side in this next contract to make up for the fact that he did the team a massive favor playing for $6.3 million here these last bunch of years.
Did he though? Because remember when he signed that contract, he was coming off, I think it was a 50-something point season. He had a sophomore slump big time, and they kind of got him at that price when he was, sort of down a bit. So, maybe at the time, I can't remember when he signed it, if people thought it was going to be a steal, but yeah.
No, I mean, it turned into the best value contract.
100%. Yeah, 100%. They're pretty locked up with their guys, though, in Colorado, right? I mean, Mikko Rantanen is your next UFA out of their big guys, at least, front. And he's not a free agent until 25. So the 25-26 season. I'm wondering about that Valerie Nikushkin contract with them at $6.1 million, whether that one might be one that they might regret down the road. We'll have to see. But I don't think they're regretting 12.6 for Nate McKinnon, especially since he brought him a Stanley Cup. And then really, there's your difference right there. You want to talk about Connor McDavid? Yes, Connor McDavid is the better player between him and Nate McKinnon, but Nate McKinnon's got the hardware, right? Okay, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here. We're finally there, JPat, the greatest Canuck to wear. And we left it at 88 on our last podcast. So at 89, this one was an easy one. It's Alex McGillney, who should be in the Hall of Fame. We asked the people on Twitter, and I don't even really care where the vote went. I know it went to yes, but it's a tragedy that Alex McGillney is not in the Hockey Hall of Fame. It's absolutely ridiculous. I don't even think it's even a question. He should be in there. And of course, Sam Gagner wore the number briefly, but it's all Alex McGillney. And of course, you have fond memories of Alex McGillney having covered the Canucks when he played.
Yes and no. He was here basically in the years that I played in or worked in Kamloops. So I didn't see it. No, I was here working at the tail end. I certainly was on the job covering the Canucks when they made the trade and sent him to New Jersey for Brendan Morrison. So I didn't see a ton of his glory years in person, but obviously growing up in Vancouver and watching the Canucks and then watching them from afar in Kamloops. I mean, he was a terrific player. You just don't put up the kind of numbers that he did. I'm with you. Like, would have been it's already going to be a special weekend with Luongo and the Sedins, but man, that would have been cool if McGillney had been part of this year's Hall of Fame class as well.
All right, so there was a vote between the number 91, came down between Jared McCann and Juho Lammikko. Where do you think the people went on this one?
I got to go with McCann.
Yes, 57%. It was close, but
right.
Jared McCann taking it at 57%. The only real vote that's left, if we do it, is the number 96, and that would be between Pavel Bure and Adam Gaudette. You know the way I feel about this. I think it's absolutely ridiculous they hand that number out to anybody else. It's going to be Pavel Bure all the way. But we thank everybody, though, that casted their vote over on Twitter at Rinkwide Podcast, because we're done. We're through it. Greatest Canuck to wear the numbers, and we went all the way through right to 96. Of course,
if you got
project,
it's a good, congrats to Grady Sass, our social media manager, kind of came up with it. Yeah, looking for content in the summer months, certainly gave us things to chew on here. Got some good engagement. So, fun project and nice timing that it takes us right up to the start of the hockey season.
And we are going to be doing post games, of course, for the preseason games. And if you want to get your Ask JPats in, we always take them at the Great Clips inbox, 778-402-9680. Ask us anything right through the preseason, all the way through the year. Hit us up in that Great Clips inbox. But looking forward to those post games, JPat, as the Canucks start to play semi for real in the next week or so.
Well, post games in the preseason are great because it's all about evaluation. So really looking forward to getting back to the rink starting on Sunday. They've got the split squads with the Calgary Flames, but they break camp in Whistler on Saturday. And they're playing games starting on Sunday and then a little bit of a layoff before they play their second, or maybe it's their third. Do we count the split squads as one? Or
how do we do the post game for that one, by the way?
Well, we'll focus on the one game. We'll focus on the one we see with our own eyes at Rogers Arena. But that's great. Like I love breaking down preseason games. They're not always the best hockey, but who stands out, who falls short. You got expectations. You want to see guys, and do something. That's where it all started, was in the preseason, because I went to the rink and I wanted to see guys that had an opportunity. The doors cracked open for them. Do something, get noticed. Don't just try to blend in with the crowd. And so it still applies, and be looking for, we'll do our do somethings on the post game as well. So really, it's here now. Looking forward to training camp, but then looking forward to starting off another season of Rinkwide Vancouver.
That's right.
Post-game podcasts.
Got to make that distinction right now. Hint, hint. All right, we'll be back. We'll have some training camp podcasts for you. And then, of course, the post-game that JPat was talking about right there. And they're right into the thick of it after that. Canucks having their preseason starting on September 25th. Those 2 games against Calgary. It's go time, baby. Hockey's back. Looking forward to bringing you some more of those post games. All right, for JPat, I'm Wadden. This has been another edition of the Rinkwide Vancouver. And remember, Rinkwide is the show that always scores.